And when I left for 4 years, it's funny how the only parts you remember are the amazing parts. And you forget about all the stuff that you don't really want to do, like the bathroom dynamic and like stuff outside that needs to be cleaned up. And it's like, and school principals and vice principals, we do it all. We do everything because it just needs to get done. But that's the part, you do that, get that out of the way so you can do the important work of connecting with the people.
What does it take to build a school where both kids and adults want to be, where joy and flourishing aren't a bonus, but the foundation? This episode is part 2 in our mini-series on school principals. In part 1, we explored why principals are essential to schools and the public education system as a whole, how their leadership shapes culture, morale, and student outcomes. Today, I'm excited to introduce you to one of the best in the profession. Antonio Vendramin has spent over 30 years in the Surrey School District, serving as a teacher, administrator, and district leader. He's opened schools from the ground up, literally and culturally. He's led major district initiatives in assessment, reporting, and digital implementations. And more importantly, he's done it all with the rare blend of joy, curiosity, humility, and passion. In this conversation, we go deep into Antonio's philosophy of school leadership, how he draws from positive psychology to build communities of well-being and self-efficacy, and what it means to be a lead learner in a time of rapid change. You'll also hear why his schools consistently stand out as some of the most vibrant, thoughtful, and human-centered places I've ever visited. This is one of the most moving conversations that I've had so far on the podcast, and I really shouldn't have been surprised by that outcome, because Antonio is really not only one of the best principals I've ever encountered, but truly one of the best among us. And now for my conversation with Antonio Vendramin. Okay, Antonio Vendramin, thank you for joining me on the Education Matters podcast. Where does this podcast find you today?
Well, it finds me in the Surrey School District, just outside of Vancouver. And each year is a journey, and with lots of questions and lots of things to be excited about, and this year is no different.
Well, excellent. I look forward to really talking about your experience as a principal, but I would have given you a proper introduction at this point, but can you give the audience an overview of what kind of work you're currently involved in?
Well, I've been with the Surrey School District since 1993, which dates me, and have filled lots of different roles. I started as a classroom teacher, actually as a TOC, a substitute teacher, classroom teacher, vice principal, school principal, and back in 2016, I had the opportunity to work in the board office in a really neat role that was just sort of carved out just basically because of the need at the time to look at changes in assessment, reporting, digital portfolios, which was at the time something that was mushrooming into a really big thing in the Surrey School District. And so I got to do some work, support schools in that capacity. It was a great experience. Like we have 130 plus schools in the Surrey School District. And you are quite tied to your site when you're a classroom teacher or a principal. Mm-hmm. And so over the course of that year, that's how I met you through one of our partnerships, and got to meet lots of different people. I got to go to about 80 of our 130 schools, which I thought was pretty good, to do things like leading professional development and supporting principals in the complex work that they do. But the calling was always back to the school with students and teachers and parents. And so we are a district that is growing at a rate. It used to be 1,000 students a year. Now it's ballooned up to 2,500.
Wow.
So it would probably take us, just to keep pace with that, would take a high school, probably in a couple of elementary schools, just to keep pace with the growth. So I think we're like a lot of growing jurisdictions. We're just catching up. And so there's there's definitely some pain that comes along with that. But the really good thing about it is it gives opportunities to do what I got to do, which is open a brand new school from the ground up. And people often ask how I got tied to this project. And so back in I think it was 2018, and it might have actually been at one of our sessions together where we were at the board office and we're flying drones around, and our superintendent at the time, Jordan Tinney, just was, a kid at heart, loved to just get involved and play with things. So next thing you know, he's flying this drone across the.
I do remember that well.
Do you remember that? And so from that, just innocently, he said, it'd be really neat if we could do, get some drone footage and show parents where all these new schools are being built. And so at the time, there were, I think, four new elementary schools and one secondary school that were sort of in queue to be built. And so I kind of took that as a, hey, you should go do that. So I used my son's drone, and one morning on the way to the board office, I stopped not far from here and flew the drone in one direction, which is where one school was going to be built. And then I flew it east, right over where we are now. And strangely, Jason, this might sound kind of corny, but it was on that day that something just connected me to this place. And I just thought, that's been something I've wanted to do for a long time, is to, build a school from the ground up physically, but then also, culturally. And so I would just stop in here on the way home from the board office, and I would take pictures. And I started the first Twitter account, even though I wasn't yet attached to the school. And just that excitement, I just saw myself here. And so it's been.
I definitely want to dive into that fully. And even get more into how someone at district board, part of the job description became to fly drones. I'm sure a lot of people thinking about administrative roles don't think that that would prop up. But one of the other goals of this podcast is to really introduce the audience to the people, not only the role and the job and the different things educators do within the public setting, but also to give a sense of who folks are. So can you kind of take us back to where and when did you grow up?
Yeah, I'm a son of two immigrants from Italy who came to Canada in the 1960s. My dad actually came first in 1960 and then went back, met my mom, got married, and did the crazy thing of let's move to Canada. And, the perception of Canada then is not what it is now. And so people kind of thought it was kind of a crazy decision. But they moved to Canada, and actually not probably a 10-minute drive from where we are now. We bought my parents bought our first property, built their own house, farmed it. So they came from agricultural families. And so something I know my dad always just, my dad didn't finish school, and nor did my mom. It was just at the time where, kids were actually needed to work on the farm. Mm-hmm. And just always stress the importance of, do well in school. You can do better than me. Although my dad did really wonderfully for our family. Mm-hmm. Didn't want me to follow in he was a cement finisher, really hardworking. I would go to work with him and think to myself, I think he's right. I don't want to do this for a living. And that just, so there's always this consistent, although he had not finished school, there's this consistent support to, your job is to do well in school. And I didn't really know growing up. I had no idea sort of what's my path, and it's okay. We know now that, if you're 19 or 20, you don't know what your path is forward. That's okay. Mm-hmm. Back when I was that age, it was more expected that you would know, okay, you've graduated high school. Now, what are you going to do? So I loved the graphic arts. I loved the fine arts. I actually went to art school for a year and enjoyed it, but it wasn't speaking to me. And it was only until my my girlfriend at the time, who's actually now my wife of over 30 years, same person, said, I've seen you with kids. I think you would be a really good teacher. And you know how, Jason, sometimes in life, people see things in you that you don't see yourself,
Mm.
like to project a future for you that you don't see yet. That's something that she did for me. And yeah, and then I said, okay, I'm going to enroll in university. I'm going to do my coursework. I'm going to start to do some work at rec centers with kids. And she was right. I feel like I've been able to stay young inside because
Mm.
that's what kids do, right? They fill you full of joy and life. And I've not regretted the decision for a day. I love being a teacher. Missed when I left the classroom to be an administrator, thinking like I'll never be as close to those kids as I was with my
Mm.
grade 7 class. And actually, nothing's been further from the truth. I feel like
Mm.
I have so much connection with like 570 kids now instead of my
Mm.
28, 29, 30 that I had in my classroom. So that's, I think, a lot of things that people fear, that, really strong teachers that have admin potential, they fear they'll never capture that magical connection with kids. Um, from my experience, nothing could be further from the truth. Like if you're very intentional and you prioritize relationships with students and families, you can recapture that. And so that's really what drew me back from the board office back to a school, because that's a big part of what I was really missing.
Is there anything about your upbringing that you wish all of these kids you work with today could experience?
Well, the running joke around our house was that my dad would go off to work and my mom would feed us breakfast and then shoo us outside and lock the door. So
Mm.
we'd be outside because there were 5 kids. I have 4 siblings, and my mom just really wanted to give me 2 or 3 hours. Just I need to
Sure.
get stuff done, and I can't with. Yeah, well, in hindsight now as a parent, you realize I just need a break from all of
Mhm.
you. And but I think things are so regimented for kids now, like overscheduled. There's unfortunately in a time and place where it's there's danger around every corner. And that was probably true back then too, but things are just simpler. At our school, we take kids on day camps twice a year. Local provincial park, which is just gorgeous. It's only 30 to 45 minutes away, and yet you feel a world away. And when you see kids that are deprived in that way, nature deprived,
Mhm.
um, that tells me that their connection to non-digital things like organic experiences is something that now I look back and I could just lose myself for hours in our back forest, and we had a ravine nearby, and I didn't need people. I didn't need anything actually to preoccupy myself or to fill myself. So that's something that I wish kids had more of.
Mm.
Um,
Um, you've always struck me as somebody who's constantly learning, and I do want to come back to this idea of a principal as a lead learner for a whole school. The entire time we've known each other, you mentioned flying drones. Like you've always been, into like at that phase was like capturing digital media and using media to tell stories about the community. But when it comes to your learning, do you have a sense or a recollection of what was the first thing you remember that you loved to learn?
do you mean as a young person?
Yeah, at any point.
Yeah.
What was your first love when it
Um,
came to learning?
yeah, I'd have to say, although I don't know if this will qualify as learning, my parents always thought I was going to be a mechanic
Mm.
because I would take things apart. The only problem was I was good at taking them apart, but I was not very good at putting them back together. So I don't think I would have made a great mechanic, but I think I've always been curious. Like I'm always curious about um, what if we try? What if we do this? What if we try this? And I think that mindset has really. It's easy to be afraid. I think as a classroom teacher, but even more so as a school administrator, it's easy to be afraid because you're always concerned. I mean, we are servants to the district, right? We service the district and servants to the people that are our students and our parents. So there's always a concern, like we want to do well for them. We want to do the right thing. We don't want to get people upset with us with the things that we do. So I think that's really been important, to be open-minded to kind of evolve, but at the same time understand that change is difficult, and change just for the sake of change is not it's not a good place to be. Like I think whenever we make a change in what we're doing in terms of how we run our school or why we do what we do, I think if you can always back that up with the why, parents will be like, okay, like, I'm okay to go along with this because I understand why schools are doing that. I can think back to one of the big changes, which is now coming up to about 10 years ago, was it's funny that we're even talking about that now because it's so not a big deal. We talk about reporting, assessment, letter grades. The wave began about 10 years ago when we started to ask, and again, it was Jordan, I think, that just said, we were at principal's meeting and he said, what if I told you didn't have to, teachers didn't have to give letter grades? And he just floated that question. And that's how it started. And I went back to my school and I said, what would I tell you if I told you didn't have to, when you communicated with the parents about student learning, that you didn't have to give letter grades? How would you feel about that? And overwhelmingly people, and I know that I struggled with that too, is that an A? Is that a B? Can I justify that? Can I move beyond? No, and now does it right. What does it actually say? Mm-hmm. And so, there's been a lot of reflecting on that over the last 10 years. And then looking at, backing that up with research and extrinsic motivation and pointing back to examples, my own examples of how there were some kids that were just so tied up in what the summative assessment was, like how many A's, hearing stories about kids coming and saying, I get X number of dollars for every A and X number of dollars for every B. And I'm thinking, all the research tells us that, extrinsic motivation long-term does not benefit us and does not benefit student learning. So, that was, it doesn't seem like a big thing now because, now we're looking at gradeless up to grade 9 in BC. And we're now just beginning to have that conversation in grade, say, 10, 11, 12 about what does good assessment look like beyond 84% and it's an A. Mm-hmm. Can we tell parents more about what their kids are learning? So I think that open-mindedness, I think I've always been, even when I was young, just sort of like, well, what would happen if we tried this? Sometimes it gets you into trouble, but I think a certain amount of that is really important to keep evolving as a person. And then for our school, to ask, well, what would happen if we did this differently? Because we have that opportunity. It's not a reset button. We're starting here all together, brand new school, brand new culture, brand new community. And so that gave us the license to be open-minded and to say, the what if rather than the yeah, but.
So without prefacing this question too much, I was blown away the very first time I met you. It was on a school visit. I brought maybe half a dozen or a dozen administrators from across Canada, and was blown away at your school, and the kind of learning I saw just looks so different from other schools. So what would you say the best classrooms look like, sound like, and feel like?
That's, Jason, when I go into a classroom and I try to normalize that here, it's not, I hate to say it's not normal, because you can tell teachers from their expression when you walk in the door, is this something that they've been used to, where a school administrator just kind of walks in and sits down beside a group of students and just wants you to just continue with the lesson. And it's hard to do, like it's easy for me to say. But when you feel like your supervisor walks through the door for no apparent reason other than just to experience the learning. So for me, it's that level of engagement. Rooms sometimes, from my experience in visiting those 80 schools, rooms can be really quiet. And I think that might say something. So it's that curiosity, like, why is it so quiet in here? It could be that, you've got a whole bunch of kids so engaged, they're actually in flow state right now, but they don't actually even know that you're in the room. Or it could be so quiet because the kids are just sort of like on edge because how a teacher might react. So I think I just enter with curiosity and engagement. And when we opened the school, we threw some really big words out. One was well-being, student well-being, teacher well-being. And the other, which was really, really important to me, was joy. And so I think I'm pretty good at being able to tell, like, are you engaged? Do you know what you're doing and why? And are you enjoying what you're doing? And so I think looking through that lens, that's always what I'm looking for. And it's usually pretty easy. If you're in classrooms, in and out of classrooms a lot, it's pretty easy to tell, kids are enjoying this, they're engaged, they understand why they're learning it. And so I think I just challenge people to, create the sort of environments, classroom environments that they would want to be part of as well as an adult. And I think that's a good filter to put on it, because nobody wants to sit in the classroom and be talked at for 30 minutes, or to do tasks and we've all been asked to do tasks and we just look at it and go like, why am I doing this? Like, I don't see the value. And so we talk a lot about meaning and purpose at Madaw, especially being part of what we'll talk about later, perhaps, is the wellness theory of PERMA, which is something that has sort of just has become a cornerstone of everything that we do here. And it's derived from the research within positive psychology, that if you can drive people to understand what they're doing and why, that is half the battle.
So can you paint a picture for the audience as to what, a joyful classroom looks like? Or even better, give us some examples of the most joyous classrooms you've seen.
Well, I would say, Jason, that the classrooms that are most obvious are ones where they actually don't notice that you come into the room. There are rooms that will sometimes, from my experience, that you walk in and everything stops. And so I would say I'm not that important. Like, I'm not that important to stop meaningful learning.
Right. So I'm guessing though that like let's paint it for them. So if if there's whole group instruction and somebody walks in from the classroom, it's a direct disconnect between the lesson. And not saying there's anything wrong with whole group. There's obviously a place for it. But what does that classroom look like when you walk in and no one knows you're there? Are there multiple groups going on? Is there technology in use? What does that look like?
Well, a part of learning by design, which is, Surrey's philosophy for education, calls for there to be flexible structures, right? So I really enjoy when I go into a class and I see that there are people that like to work on their own. There are people that prefer to make strategic choices of who they work with. There are different ways that people like to demonstrate how that they've learned. And so when I see that there are a myriad of different things happening, then I know that there's that layer of personalization that has been afforded the students, as opposed to cookie cutter, like this is how you're going to do it. And sometimes I'll challenge that, So for example, we're, a technology rich school. It's a commitment that I've made, not because I think technology is the answer, but it is a tool that needs to be there like any other tool that we would, like you need something to write with. Well, you're not going to get a pen 1 hour a week. It's going to be there if you need it. Mm-hmm. And so I love that in so many classrooms that I get to go to in our school is there's really great variety. And I think personalization, I think we'll talk about that later about, when if things are going to look really, really good in the future, I think teachers are going to really start to look at how can we personalize a student's experience at school. Because the older I get, the more I realize that we are so unique in terms of how we process, how we express, how we like to demonstrate, what we want to learn about. And that's, I think, one of the powers of the BC curriculum is, when we made the shift from a content-based to a competency-based curriculum, I think a lot of people took a deep sigh and say, like, finally, I can get beyond checking off the boxes that I've covered all this content. Because essentially that's all people were doing was making sure that kids knew a whole bunch of stuff and could somehow demonstrate that back to us somehow. And then the personalization was, well, you can show me how you can memorize this and give it back to me, which is not, when you talk about what we really need, we do need really good communicators, but we need really good thinkers, people that can actually do something with a vast amount of data and information that's coming at them and make some sense of it. That I think is something that's really important. Learners are going to be able to learn whatever they need to learn. Our goals, I think, are now rather than to fill the vessel, but really to equip them with what they need to process. Like we're being bombarded, and every year it seems like it's more and more sources. And how do we filter through that in a strategic way that we don't get overloaded, but we can do that in an effective way?
So what are the qualities that you most admire in great teachers that help students along this journey, that are able to take data and to take all this information and utilize it in the best way for the student? So what are those qualities?
Well, I think first and foremost, and I would hope that I would be able to go back and talk to my students. I was a teacher for 12 and a half years, that I hopefully would be able to ask them, did your teacher care about you? And that's at the moment, I think it's the fundamental thing that I think some people miss. One of my first interview questions when I'm interviewing candidates for our school is, how do you purposely develop relationships with students, with colleagues, with parents? And what impact does that have on learning? And so, it's, I find that you either know how to do that really, really well, or you can work really hard to be more intentional about it. But the teachers that I admire the most start there, and then they have all this built up social capital that, when things are difficult, and things get difficult over the course of the year, children struggle with their learning, they need to be pushed at times. But I'm a firm believer, and I think it's the same thing for staff and me. I got to hire most of the teachers at my school for various reasons. And one of the main reasons was they really understood that whole importance of, connecting before directing. We call that in attachment theory that we connect to kids and we collect them before we direct them into doing something. Our teachers are really good at that, understand how important that is. So to me, that's the first thing. And I keep reminding my staff that, my staff is quite experienced. And I said, you all didn't get hired here because you're the most senior. You all continue to evolve and to learn. And so Another interview question is, what are you currently working on? What part of your practice are you currently working on? And every single teacher that I hired was able to, in detail, explain things that they were currently working on, even though they had been, in the profession for, 20, 30, more than 30 years, some of them. But to a T, almost every one of them was able to articulate specific things that they were working on to maintain that relevance to students. And I think that's really important to me, because I think the role of the principal has changed a lot. And you date yourself very quickly if you get to the point and say, you know what, I'm experienced. I've done this for X number of years. Because the moment you do that, that's the moment you'll slip and you'll fall behind. Your teachers will be off down the road and you'll be, chasing the bus wondering what just happened. I've just become irrelevant. And so I think that's really important for the role that I play, but as a classroom teacher, being really open, being secure in your ability to say, I actually don't know about as much as I should know about assessment for learning practices. Like I do need to work more on developing criteria or focusing more on descriptive feedback, like the formative stuff, rather than relying on the summative stuff, right? And so it takes a lot of courage. I've heard people say that it's hard to admit that that you weren't very good at something as a classroom teacher, because you feel like you've damaged kids, because but we all do the best that we can. Like as a brand new teacher, if I think back to what did I do when I first started teaching, I don't think I didn't know much, and but I cared for kids and I wanted to keep learning. And so over the years, I feel like I've gotten better as a professional because of that commitment to keep learning. And then I think, the best teachers are the ones who do acknowledge that. They go like, what, I am better when I'm with my colleagues, like what our five brains can do, and I have some very smart people at my school, but what the five of us can do will trump any day what I can do on my own. And so I think that just having that humility to say, what, I'm open to not being the expert.
So I've met a lot of principals in my work in a lot of different jurisdictions over the years. And few strike me to love the job as much as you love the job. Like you went from being you went from being a principal to a really cool, in my opinion, district role where you were involved in a lot of, especially at the time with the new curriculum coming out. And as you mentioned already, the expanding district. So you're involved in a lot of really cool work. But then you left that work to come back and be a school principal. What is it that you love about the role so much?
It's just fun. Like I say that with all honesty. I mean, there are tough days for sure, Jason. Talk to any vice principal or principal. There are tough days where you're doing things that you don't really want to do. Like you're filling roles of, just doing things you don't want to do. But all that gets erased when I'll just give you an example. So my dad passed last year, beginning of last year, which is a tough time, and so I remember coming back to school, and I just said to staff, I said, I just don't want to talk about it. I'll kind of process it on my own when the time is right. And but going back to school brought me joy. It brought me it filled my heart where maybe my heart was deflated a bit. I go to school and it fills it. And I remember walking into a grade 1-2 classroom, and two girls came, and I sat there all at the carpet, and I sat on one of the small chairs there. And two of them came over. One put her arm around me, and the other held my hand. And they looked at me and they said, we're really sorry about your dad. And it was just genuine care. Like it was just, these are 6-year-old children that get it, that get that you know, so, and I just, that's just one example.
Mm.
But
That's beautiful. Very beautiful.
yeah, it
That's
was a
very
beautiful
beautiful.
moment. And I just thought, I just can't. And they did it like they weren't children. They came to me like two
Yeah.
adult friends and just, wrapped around and saw that there was hurting there, and I cared enough to do that. And so, I try to coach every year. So I coach because nobody else wants to do the boys basketball. I coach basketball because I love it.
Yeah.
I go into classrooms and I play with children because I get to play, and I get paid to go and interact and play with children.
Mm.
And so, and when there's a soccer game outside and I'm doing supervision, I'm going to jump in and play because adults need to play, right? I
Yeah.
think we get to be adults and we think everything is so serious. And there's definitely times where I do have to be serious.
Mhm.
But if I don't have to be serious, like I'm around 500, almost 600 children, it's okay to act like it's okay to have fun,
Mm.
because I think that is, a real focus at our school. And I hope that all principals and vice principals look at it as, you can contribute to the joy that people experience at your site. And I know people talk about that sometimes about, there's a shortage of people that want to be administrators. And I'll be honest with you, sometimes I would look at, whatever was happening with a school principal, and I'm like, that doesn't look like a lot of fun.
Yeah.
An irate parent or a disagreement with a staff member, or when things go sideways behavior wise with a student, those aren't the fun things, right? So I think it's really important that people see that, yeah, there are challenging parts of our job, but there's some really amazing parts, amazing parts. And when I left for 4 years, it's funny how the only parts you remember
Mhm.
are the amazing parts,
Mhm.
and you forget about all the stuff that you don't really want to do, like the bathroom dynamic and like stuff outside that needs to be cleaned up. And it's like, and
Right.
school principals and vice principals, we do it all. We do
Mhm.
everything because it just needs to get done. And but that's the part, you do that, get that out of the way, so you can do the important work of connecting with
Mhm.
with the people, right? And that's the thing that fills me the most.
Well, you also earlier described this calling as you were doing drone footage to communicate to the community about the new schools, this calling that you felt to be part of opening a school. I think that's something that not a lot of folks reflect on enough, because I think it was really interesting, your journey. What was it? What was it like to open a new school?
Well, Jason, I think it's actually quite strange. When I first became an administrator, um, there was a call out. So via email, district will send something out to all the administrators saying, "Oh, we're opening this school. It's in this area. It's opening at this time. If you're interested, you could send us an expression of interest, right?" And so that was way back in 2006, and I just thought to myself, you know, that would be an amazing experience, because I love to see growth. I love to build things. Like I think principals at their heart love to see things grow and love to see things, maybe not physically, like if you're going to a school that's existing already, you can build in different ways. But this was literally the physical building of the school, the building of the community, the building of the staff, the building of our philosophy for learning. I've always enjoyed that. And so that sort of laid dormant for years and years and years. And there was a period where there wasn't a lot of growth in the Surrey School District. They weren't building lots of schools. And then all of a sudden there was this uptick, very, very quick uptick. And the timing was just right. I had been a principal at two schools. I'd done the district work, and it was all coming full circle. And actually the school that back in 2006, the one that there was an expression of interest, call for expression of interest. That ended up being the school that I was the principal at after my first principalship.
Hmm.
So I ended up going to that school. It was 9 years old at that time when I got there. So it's almost like things were kind of speaking to me, sort of that initial thought of that'd be great to do one day, and then I end up at that school that was being opened. But like I said, there's the board office job was great. I learned a lot. I saw behind the scenes of things that you never get to see
Hmm.
if you're a school-based principal.
What are the things that you wish more principals and teachers knew about what goes on at the district level?
Well, I think how much thought goes into the decision-making process. It's we're at and thankfully so, like, we're insulated from all the work that goes on behind the scenes. So, for example, if a digital resource is going to be endorsed by the Surrey School District, it's not just like, hey, this one looks good, let's do a cost share with people. There's so much that goes on in the background, from senior team to the appropriate departments. It is such a big machine. Like, the Surrey School District now has a budget over $1 billion. It's the biggest employer in the Surrey School District. There are so many departments that I don't think I would even understand. I mean, you can get a directory, you can see all the layers in a directory, but you don't really, until you get to physically work there, what's on the fourth floor and who's there and who's on the third floor and what's in the basement and where's IMS, like our technology department. Where is this and how does it all stitch together? And so that's something that I hope that I help do a little bit, is help stitch some departments together, because we can get quite siloed. I think schools can get siloed, and what's happening at the school down the road, who has very similar children, might have similar challenges to you or opportunities. And so I think if I learned anything, it was also to pay attention to, what else is happening out there and what can we learn from them. Districts are like that too. I mean, when we were going through coming up with our new reporting policy back in 2016, 2017, it was a bit frustrating because I knew that Langley was doing the same work, Vancouver was doing the same work, Richmond, Burnaby, North Van, like, we're all doing the same work in parallel. Wouldn't it be really neat to get together to do some of this work thoughtfully together? It's just a challenge to do that, but that's one of my big takeaways was the interconnectivity of all the different departments, how they all work together, and I would joke around that I'd walk by a kiosk or a desk and I'd see a name and I'd say, like, oh, I've been receiving emails from you for 15 years. I never knew where you worked or what you looked like. And the same thing for me, right? I mean, I think people from HR would probably be like, oh, who's this Antonio guy? I've been sending emails to him for to do that. But again, that comes back to the whole human side of the organization, which sometimes can be missing because either people from schools don't get to go to the board office very often. It's just the way it is. Or people in the board office maybe don't get to schools enough. And I think that if I was the lead of any department at DEC, at our board office, I'd be saying, you know what, we're gonna visit some schools. Dan Turner, who's our manager of our technology department, the director, sorry, he's been quite intentional about that. He's been like, we're going to get our people and we're going to go to some schools and we're going to see what the lived experience is, because it's, the board office is it doesn't change a lot from day to day. I find, it's like first day of school doesn't really feel any different than the 30th day of school.
Right.
at the board
Right.
office.
At the board office. Right.
But come to a school, my goodness, like the first day of
Mhm.
school is like there's a lot of excitement, a lot of energy. So I think connecting all the pieces for people, that's really important.
Um, do you feel that the opposite needs to happen more? Like that teachers need to visit the board office in a more intentional way? And I'm not putting the onus on teachers, but just the idea that teachers can be quite disconnected from the board office.
Yeah, I think it goes both ways, Jason. I think it's, it's easier to get departments into schools, to be honest with you, than get
Mhm.
teachers out of classrooms. But
Right.
there's just this, we would just joke around about, we say the district did this, but people don't really know what they're talking about. Like
Mm.
the district. Well, who are you talking about? Like,
It's like the
you know,
empire.
that it's like what's behind the black curtain.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah. Yeah.
so, but it's just because people don't know, right?
Mhm.
And so for me, that was a really valuable experience to see how everything is connected and how many different departments there are, just how big of a machine it is, and also to have gratitude because compared to some other districts, and I can speak to some neighboring districts because I know people that work in them, but Surrey is sometimes it could be like we don't have enough classrooms. There's too many
Mhm.
portables. There's not enough EA time. There's not enough this and not enough that. There's a teacher shortage. But Surrey, I have to say, is faring as well as we can because it is a really great district to work with. Teachers, I feel, are quite supportive in terms of you know technology access, professional development access. I mean, there's so much professional development
Mhm.
opportunities in Surrey School District, as much as you would want. Um, it's just now a point of how do we make that easier? Like if you live 45 minutes from the board office, are you going to drive 45 minutes to the board
Mhm.
office and then drive back home after you've spent a long day
Yeah.
at
You're
school
right.
working hard with
Yeah.
children? How do we look at different models, like online models or even having offsite things where, we're going to do the same workshop or we're going to do it in the South Surrey. It
Mhm.
literally is a 45-minute to an hour drive to get to South
Yeah.
Surrey at that time of day. So, it's difficult to criticize people for not accessing professional development.
Mhm.
So they're there. I just think that we need to always think through the lens of what is that teacher's experience? They live in South Surrey, they teach in South Surrey, they're going to come to North Surrey, go to professional development day, and then drive back down. So it's just those are all things that we need to think about. We need to be mindful about, what are the opportunities, but also what are some of the roadblocks.
Yeah. Is this like the size, scope, scale of a district the size of Surrey? Is that the biggest impediment to district-wide implementations? Like you and I were involved in several, and they're just so difficult, and they take years. And I don't think you and I ever felt we got the kind of traction we wanted to, just because of um, from my perspective, the size of the district. Anything else stand out as to what makes district-wide implementation so difficult? And you can say
I would, yeah,
implementations or district-wide changes, right?
yeah. Um, well, I think it's always time. So can you exert enough influence and pressure over enough time? Like I
Mm,
think back to probably our one of our biggest initiatives would be the use of digital portfolios.
mhm,
Um, and do you have the time and do you have are you committed to making sure you can do that over a long enough period of time and sometimes starting small, right? So I know that we've explored different things like making sure that we start in a very grassroots way. Like, we're not going to force people.
mhm,
What we're going to say, here's an
right,
opportunity if you're curious about that, and your school has a team of teachers. And I remember the tool is now gone. The initial digital portfolio tool that we used is now gone. But when it first started, it was just sort of this calling out of an opportunity. Like,
mhm.
what if you, and sometimes just intriguing people with a question, like, what if you didn't have to write report cards anymore?
Can you give folks a sense of how long of a time frame you're talking about? Because I think the audience here is going to be a lot of ed tech folks, a lot of district administrators. Because I think you're bang on about this. But in your view, how much time does, let's take that example of implementing digital portfolios instead of a grade, letter grades and things like that, or doing both, like I know you did for a while. What is a realistic time frame that people can expect for any major change to take hold and take root?
Well, I think each example might be a little bit different, but for us, we were looking at 4, 5, 6 years to get to, and not even to get to full implementation. So when you talk about teacher practice, the thing is there is still professional autonomy, and you do have to offer another option. But to go to a tipping point, and the tipping point is where you start to see more and more people migrate over to, say, for example, a specific tool. Another big initiative for us was the Office 365, Microsoft 365. And being really thought it was such a huge rollout for us. It was, and then I put my principal lens on that and felt like so many of the initiatives we start with teachers. Because it's logical that teachers are in front of children and we want bang for our buck. And but as a school principal, it's really easy to get disconnected really, really quickly, because some of those opportunities are not directed towards or tailored for administrators. So when we, for example, so I think every approach is a bit different, but with Office 365, knowing that we need to start there. So we actually started with taking administrators to downtown Vancouver to Microsoft headquarters. And we actually started with doing PD with them. And then we really envisioned that there would be this trickle effect, like, they'd start to use things like Sway. They use online documents that people could collaborate on. And they would start to use OneDrive to back up all their data. And then it was very organic, and principals would say, "Hey, Antonio, like, I think there's a lot of really good tools that will actually save people a lot of time, will streamline their work." Because if you really want to interest people, the why is really important. And if one of the whys is I can actually make, I can help you do your work more effectively, then that's really important, right? So why do we use digital portfolios? We believe that the descriptive feedback and the vivid examples of learning are better than a typed out paragraph and a letter grade. That's what we believe. We believe you should use Office 365 tools because you shouldn't store all your data on a device that might get damaged or lost or stolen. That's what we believe. We believe that you should be able to use tools that allow you to collaborate with your colleagues. And so that was really how I got all my visits in, Jason, to be honest with you. It's, hey, yeah, it's great. I'd love to come do a lunch and learn, but I want your school to commit to at least 3 of them. So it means I'll come back 3 times. So come back for session 1, come back in a month. We'll build on that, incrementally. And I honestly feel, and that all happened right before COVID. And I'll say that we will take part of the pat on the back when we actually entered, doing blended learning, and oh my goodness, we have to have online meetings, and holy cow. So we had the infrastructure in place. We had enough people that were comfortable enough to be like, okay, I'm not going to jump off a cliff here. I can do this because I've been to some sessions. I understand how these things work. And so thankfully the timing of that worked out where, we could go on to some, and no blended learning is ever going to take the place of like face-to-face instruction, but we're at least able to survive those 2 or 3 months.
Well, and let me just kind of recap what I think some of the important things that I'd like the audience to really keep in mind here when it comes to an implementation is you had the why. So you had the communication as to why you were doing the thing that you were doing. You had the community piece. You mentioned the lunch and learns, and I know you and I did, I don't know how many dozens of those we did over the years, right? In a variety of different forms. And I know with me and you was just one initiative, and you did them across a whole variety of different initiatives. And then the time aspect. I think all three of those things should be kept sort of front and center when we're thinking about how to impact change at the grassroots level and all the way up to the district level, right? Because I think all three are kind of underestimated. Somebody thinks that the tool is so great that it's going to implement itself, or that the administrative group that's rolling out the tool or the idea is so powerful in itself that it's only a matter of time before it takes off. But you and the team there at Surrey over the years were definitely the most intentional that I came across, and I think that shows in just the kind of Surrey way and Surrey community that you've all developed.
And we talked about, connecting with students and connecting with teachers and parents. And it would be, I think, people underestimate how vulnerable people have to be sometimes to put themselves out there to try new things. It's a heck of a lot easier if it's safe and I can email Antonio with a question and I will, non-judgmental, get some feedback or get the assistance I need. So the relationship can't be understated. I mean, I just feel how you present yourself, I'm the expert, I know everything. That doesn't go very well with people. There has to be a vulnerability that, this is new for me as well. I will help you with what I know, and I'll probably learn some from you as well. So I think that relationship piece was super important, like developing those. That's why I'm not going to come and do a one-off lunch and learn, because it's not going to stick. But a really great example was a secondary school, and I was warned by the principal, there's, I don't know if you're going to get many people out, but I just went overboard, and every day I'd leave, and I'd leave them a challenge, right? And at the time, I think we were using Flipgrid, which was part of the you can put a prompt there, and then people just post a video response. And so it was really simple. Okay, go onto Flipgrid before my next visit and post one thing that you learned that you think you're going to maybe try to implement, either personally, professionally, with your students, whatever. And then I'll randomly draw, and that person will get a laptop. So sometimes you have to, you got to put some skin in the game, and sometimes it's what a teacher's missing sometimes in the classroom. Yeah, they wish they had more devices, right? So
a little bit of incentive, right? I
think, it's nice. And that group, I ended up going back to that secondary group more than any other secondary group. I think I went back 4 or 5 times. They kept asking me, and was it for the laptop? I don't care. Maybe it was partially that, but the group started to grow as well. There were people there that didn't come the first day. And so, because there's a relationship there now, it's not some random person from the board office.
Right.
It's
right.
So, in those
every parent and economist would agree with you in that approach. Incentivize the behavior, and it works.
Yeah.
So, Antonio, I know we're getting towards the end of our time, but I really do want to ask you, if you look forward into the future of education, what does it look like to you?
I think what I see in my current school is sort of a step in that direction. The more and more I'm in schools, the more and more I can tell that kids, and we talked about this a little bit already, really want their learning to be personalized. I think classrooms have always been diverse. Same discussion I have with parents when perhaps their child is in I'll make this up, a grade 6, 7 classroom. And I say, you have kids in that 6, 7 classroom whose abilities will range anywhere from grade 3 to 10, that. And they look at me like, really? And that's the truth. So it might be in reading, writing, it could be or their social emotional development. But your grade 7 classroom is not 30 identical at the same level developmentally children. And so how do you teach a class like that without understanding what their strengths are, what their stretches are, what they're actually genuinely interested in learning about? And I think the best teachers now will be the best teachers 20 years from now. They'll be ones who really know their students well, who make sure that the instruction is tailored to what kids need, and that their student passions are also taken into account. And something that we are working on this year, we've had our student learning plan has been focused around research around positive psychology, and specifically about doing strength inventories. So schools historically have been really good at figuring out what's wrong with the child, like why isn't the child reading at grade level, or why does the child not have number sense? And those are all important things to do. But sometimes we will let go of what are the strengths? Where do the strengths lie? And sometimes they'll lie in places where we're not looking, we're not measuring. Just give you a great example. Last year we had our first talent showcase. It's not a contest. It's just bring your talent, show it off. And honestly, if we had not had that opportunity, there'd be like 30 or 40 kids that I would have no idea that they had strengths in that area. One child in particular, he's in grade 5 this year, grade 4. And so they had to fill out forms, and the form said, name and what are you going to do, and details about the song or whatever you needed. And he said, drumming. So I went to go talk to him. I said, well, what kind of drumming? We have indigenous drums. We have djembe drums. He goes, drumming, like the drum kit. Like, I said, oh, do you drum? He goes, I've been drumming my whole life. Unless you give a kid a chance to drum, how are you going to know that he's been drumming his whole life?
Yeah.
So next thing I know, he's doing, I said, so what song? So he's doing Bruno Mars, Uptown Funk.
Oh, nice.
And he just rocks it. Like we're in the music room and he's drumming, and then it's during lunch. And then all of a sudden, all these adults, that start to pop their head in, like, who is this kid, right? No one knew he could do that. So I only use that as an example that, if we sort of keep things really tight and regimented and keep kids in these lanes or these boxes, sometimes we don't know where the real strength and passion lies. So I'm really excited this year to work with our staff to do that strengths inventory with more of their children. And one of the really effective strategies in positive psychology is getting people, not just children, but even adults, to do their strength inventory, identify their signature strengths, and then to apply that strength in a new and novel way. And so our staff, they've asked me to lead a session. It's their professional development, so they've asked me, and I'm like, if you want me to do a session, I will do a session. And so that's on Thursday. And so our teachers are going to be going through that exercise. The same exercise that I hope they'll open the door to their students to do is get your 20 kids to do the survey, find out what their strength inventory is, and then as a team with parents and teachers, develop a passion or something that they can do that uses that strength in ways that they've never used that strength before. And so I'm really excited by that. We've done that with a little cohort of 20 kids that I've identified as being, like they're not flourishing yet. So we've worked intensely with small cohorts, but it's now something that I really would like to see go much, much bigger. And so that everybody can find that passion. Everyone can intentionally enter into flow state, like get in the zone around work that they're really passionate about, not because, their teacher said, here, do this assignment. Like, I would see schools that would be more and more like that'd be paying attention to not just what do we want, and schools do need and want things from students, but at the end of the day, I'll tell you, Jason, all these funny stories. You start talking about things. I had a teacher at a previous school who wrote a report card, and the report card said something to the effect of, "Oh, it would be nice if so and so participated more in PE activities." This child was an elite dancer, and actually, if you were to pay attention, there's a dance group that always came to the school, and she was part of that group. Dances like almost every day. She's physically active. She's amazing at what she does, but she doesn't participate fully in PE. Now, should she participate more in PE? Yeah, that would be nice. But what about, so-and-so is an accomplished dancer who dedicates a lot of her free time outside of school to honing her craft. That sounds totally different. So I just, when I think about that example, I just think schools can't be too into themselves and say, this is it, because kids have lives. They have things that they're pursuing, things that they're really good at that just don't maybe fall within the scope of what a school does on a day-to-day basis. And I think that we need to honor that.
That's a great answer. So the penultimate question, if you had a magic wand, what would you do to education?
Magic wand. Well, I feel like I had a magic wand
and it's all powerful,
as a school
by the
principal.
way. It's all powerful. You can do whatever you want.
Yeah. I'm just thinking, like, off the top of my head, the biggest game changer for us here is I got to hire my whole staff. That is a magic wand. You ask a principal, you'd be like, that is a magic wand. Sometimes you can make magic happen. Like the school that you visited me at, one that I was at for just a couple of years, the conditions were right there for 2 new administrators to come in, and within 2 short years to really make some magical things happen. Like sometimes there's just an appetite, and you just add the right ingredients, and the magic happens. There are other places where you get placed and culture is quite ingrained already, and you're just swimming upstream, just trying to make inroads. And sometimes those can take 2, 3, 4, 5 years. Sometimes they might not happen at all if a staff really feel like, you know what, we've been here for 20 years. You're going to be here for 5. We're going to be here for at least another 10. So like that's really hard, Jason, because you just like, how do I move forward? And there's always things that schools can do to move forward. We're not talking about gutting everything, because I think there's always something good in schools. There's always people doing really great things. But I also believe that every school can move forward, even if it's incrementally or in small little ways or nuanced ways. But that's impossible to do if there's a wall there and there's no appetite to let you in, to allow you in to do some of that work with the staff. So to me, the magic wand was the HR piece. I think I'm speaking for most principals. I think like we are the gatekeepers for our school. We want people that are going to come through this school who are going to put relationships at the front with students. They're going to work with colleagues. They're going to keep learning, because in this rapidly changing world, if you don't keep learning, you get left behind pretty quickly. So I think that those are all really key ingredients to making sure that a school community is flourishing.
Wonderful, my friend. Now, always the last question: what podcast, book, video, movie, album, or any of the above would you recommend to the audience?
I am the book Flourish. I think I've read it over and over and over and over again. It's almost my resource guide to helping guide my community. My son received the copy of the book back when he was a teenager, and he never read it. But I did, and I read it the first time, and then when I was opening this school, I read it through a different lens of what does my school community need. And so the book Flourish by Martin Seligman is an amazing resource. I've written all over it. It's guided my work here for the last 4 years. And so I think that's a great read for school leaders, but even for people personally. And looking at that acronym of PERMA and how do we intentionally add more of those elements, positive emotions, engagement, relationships, meaning, and accomplishment. How do we embed more of those into our daily lives so that we can flourish, right? Because we all know people that are flourishing, they're just lighting it up. And then we also know people that are struggling, right? And so when you look at people that are struggling, quite often you can point to some of those letters in that acronym that aren't there, that they're missing, that they need to build more into. And then I watch anything documentary I find really interesting. And one of my favorite podcasts still is, it's an old one, it's been around for a long time, is Radio Lab. Just some of the topics that are covered are just so intriguing, make me think about both sides of arguments. And so that would be one podcast that I would recommend to anyone who's curious.
Well, great recommendations and a great way to end it. Thank you for doing this, my friend.
Anytime.
This podcast is recorded on the territory and Treaty 13 lands of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation and on the traditional territory of the Huron-Wendat and the Haudenosaunee. The show is edited and produced by the marvelous and talented Andrew Mastroianni. If you like what you're hearing, make sure you subscribe to us on Spotify or wherever you listen to your podcast. Until next time, remember, there's absolutely no inevitability as long as there's a willingness to contemplate what's happening. I'm your host, Jason Bucheri. Until next time.